All right. Hello, everyone. We're getting started now. Thanks for joining us. Today's roundtable webinar is going to revolve around the question of whether to go native or not to go native to Salesforce. We're going to break it down question by question for you, but first I did want to make some introductions before we get into the panel discussion. My name is Haley Smith. I'm a marketing manager at Flowsom, and I'm your host for today. And moderating the discussion today is going to be Tom Polivka, VP of Sales at Flowsom. We have a great list of panelists joining us today, as you can see. We'll start with Megan Hyman. She is Director of Partnerships and Alliances at Akunu. We have JP Leggett, President and CEO at Squiver. We have got Bill Cooler, founder at Resource Hero, and we have Rich Rosen, founder of FastCall, Ryan Sieve, CTO of Accounting Seed, and Simon Thompson, who is CEO of Improved Apps. So each of these organizations are Salesforce native by design, and each of these speakers bring to the table their own experiences and knowledge related to Salesforce native apps, hopefully to help you make the best decision for your organization when you're looking for and implementing a new application. Before we get started, I do have a couple things to cover. Although participants are muted, you can type any questions you might have in the Q&A box in the toolbar. And we're going to be going through those questions and choose a couple to add on to the questions and prompts that we already have scheduled for the discussion. So in this way, you'll actually have the chance to guide the discussion a little bit as an audience member and get some of your own questions answered. One last note, we will be sending out the recording afterwards. So keep an eye out for an email later today. And I think that's all I've got. So I'm going to pass it over to Tom. Tom, you can go ahead and roll with it and begin the discussion.
Great, thanks, Haley. As Haley said, the whole concept of native is one of the hottest topics right now in the Salesforce community. So we thought it was appropriate to bring some of the prominent native ISVs together to talk about this topic in a little more detail. I'd like to welcome everybody that has joined us to find out about it. And also, I'd like to welcome our panelists too. So hopefully you find this very useful and instructive as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the first question over to JP and ask probably the most basic question. What is a native application?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I get to set the tone a little bit. So there's a lot of confusion out there on what is a native application, what does that mean? And so I'm going to really hone in on two characteristics. Native application is entirely built and coded within Salesforce. Typical characteristics of that will look like Apex or Visual Force or Lightning components as you relate that back to the solution. And then there's no proprietary API, meaning there's no data transfer out of Salesforce as well. And so those are the two characteristics that I think we're going to work off of today, and we'll broaden the horizons from there.
Great answer. So when I go out and talk to customers and analysts sometimes, and we bring up the native topic, they ask me, why is it that, you call yourself native, or, how have you given yourself this designation? So, Rich, could you kind of eliminate that situation or that issue, as to how you do get the native certification?
Yeah, sure. It's you submit a case to Salesforce. The process is not easy, but we submitted a case to Salesforce and ask a few questions, and then badge appears.
Gotcha. So it's something that Salesforce then confers upon the ISV. It's not something that we do on our own and call ourselves native, right?
That's absolutely correct. And I was actually surprised by that. I did think that we would have the badge by default because we're a native app, but we did not. We had to ask for it. And honestly, we had to beg a little bit for it.
Right. So as a follow-on to that question, because there still may be a little bit confusion as to who is native, I mean, which apps are native and which aren't. Bill, do you want to talk about that? If somebody's looking for an app on the App Exchange, and they're looking for a number of criteria that would suit their requirements, is there something that they can look for that suggests that the app that they're looking at is native?
Yeah, that's like Rich just mentioned. When an app feels that they're a native application and they submit that case to Salesforce, Salesforce is going to review the application. They're going to look at the information about the app, look at the listing, They're going to confirm that it's passed the Salesforce security review. So in addition to that automated code scanner, they actually, the Salesforce product security team is going to review the application. And as was mentioned, they're going to look for things like, was it built using Salesforce technology like Apex, Visualforce, Lightning Components? Is the data from the application stored within Salesforce, objects, custom objects or standard objects? And then they confirm, as was mentioned, that it doesn't require any external callouts or APIs. And then once all that is confirmed, they're basically going to give that native application badge to the listing. And that looks like a native application badge. You'll see it on the actual listing site for the application. It'll be a little icon that shows that it's been reviewed and that it meets that criteria of the native application.
So it's fair to say then that if they do not see that emblem, which I guess it looks like a little cloud icon, there's probably a pretty good chance that the app is not a native app, right?
I think it's fair to say that it's not a native app, or that application team they just haven't gone through the process yet.
Right. And in which case they would ask some more questions at the ISV to say, okay, are you built into Salesforce, and some of the criteria that we'd already talked about. So
one of the questions I always ask is, does the app work outside of Salesforce? Because a native app is only going to work in Salesforce.
That's a great point. I guess you can cut to the chase right there, just ask a single question. So awesome. Well, hopefully we've demystified, the native certification for the folks on the call. So let's take a little bit of a different path now. Megan, do native apps undergo a different level of security certification? Security is always a big issue that we hear alongside, that native topic. So can you talk to that?
Yes, I am totally passionate about security, as I know lots of enterprise customers particularly are. So I think the first thing to just understand is that everything on the App Exchange goes through a very significant code review, which if you talk to any developer who's done an app on the App Exchange, they will complain bitterly about, and the process around. Okay, so, but this is actually a really good thing, because that means like to App Exchange or to not App Exchange, like you are getting you are getting the first level kind of defense for your organization by choosing something that's on the App Exchange versus not. So that's just like first level there. The other thing that I just learned recently is that the App Exchange not only reviews the code, but you also have to certify like from your bank that you're in good standing. So there's like another level of like just like making sure your business is kind of a legit thing. So that's a really powerful thing just by being on the App Exchange. But in terms of security, I think we need to think about not just the code security, but the data security, because data security breaches cost millions of dollars. And when we talk to enterprises, that's what they're really concerned about. And that's where native apps shine. So if you've talked to anybody that's taken the admin certification, for example, it's 80% security, because Salesforce has built in like myriad ways of actually securing the data. So when you're thinking about data security, there's two pieces. There's within your org itself, and there's transferring outside of the org. And where most of the data breaches, well, I shouldn't say every, but where there's a lot of vulnerability is transferring data from within Salesforce to outside of Salesforce. And that is the key differentiator for native apps, is that the customer data is not processed by a third party. So if you trust Salesforce, then if you have a native app on top, it basically reinforces all the data security permissions kind of that you have, and you're not transferring the data. So that's what I think about a lot in terms of security. So I can talk about security all day. We can come back to this again, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, I think that, that leads to an interesting catchphrase or motto. It's, if you trust Salesforce, then you should trust our application, right? If we're in the native category. I think that's really what it comes down to.
And I think it also makes it easier for customers to purchase an App Exchange application. If you've got info, security, potential risks or challenges, you're a regulated business perhaps, then if you've chosen the application that's going to solve some business problems, you want it to go through your security process as quick as possible as well.
Yeah, that was another question I was going to ask, based on what, Megan and Simon have said. All of us as vendors, as ISVs, whether you're native or not, you look at the sort of the impending Infosec review with a particular customer, in a different way. I've been at companies where, we would avoid it as long as we could, and then, grudgingly fill out the questionnaire, comply, or, hope that Infosec doesn't show up because, it's going to add a bump in the road. But what I found is that I have a different attitude, because we're a native application. It doesn't mean that we don't have to go through the scrutiny or we don't have to fill out the questionnaire. But I feel like it's sort of like a breath of relief for me, because I'm not so concerned about getting caught up, especially when I'm competing against non-native apps. It's just like, if you don't trust us, I don't know how you can trust anybody else. So I don't know if the rest of you feel that way too, in terms of, facing that, inevitable Infosec scrutiny a different way, right?
Yeah, we actively encourage it, involve IT, let them have a good look at what we do. You've already invested heavily in Salesforce, you trust Salesforce. So as Megan was saying, this is just an extension to your existing customizations, say, and us at Improved Apps, we don't have access to customer orgs. So there's no risk of us as the vendor having access to the data. And so there's no worry about what, you've got full control of it, like you control any other aspect of Salesforce.
And then sort of the other, the partner to security obviously is compliance. And so I was interested to know from a GDPR standpoint, when we're doing business in various different theaters, I mean, does this give an advantage? Do you think the native aspect gives you an advantage with GDPR and some of the other compliance?
Absolutely.
So, yes.
Absolutely. We as vendors are not data controllers. We're not holding any customer data. So from a GDPR standpoint, certainly it's very hot here in Europe, obviously. We tick all the boxes very, very quickly. Customer has control, and that's the main takeaway for me.
Right. Great. So we talked about security. Ryan, what are some of the other benefits that you can expect from deploying native applications?
Sure. Yeah. I could probably talk for the whole panel time that we have blocked out here, but I'll try to kind of break it down into three main thoughts here. And I think a lot of what I'll have to say aligned with what Megan was just describing. But the first thing is, trust is Salesforce's #1 value, right? They're super serious about that. Every application that goes on the App Exchange is scrutinized. Before joining Accounting Seat, I spent about 5 years at Salesforce myself. It's no joke. They're serious about trust. And that shows up in ways of, security, availability, their infrastructure, compliance that sits behind that. So it's really true to their core values. It's their #1 value. And by building a native application, of course, that's going to extend into the core of all of our native apps, right? We can't help but design for these principles because, of course, we get checked on it as we go to list our app on the App Exchange. But it's just fundamental to the way that Salesforce operates and all the native apps that live on top of it. I'd say the next major point would be that, native apps really kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So one of the big benefits is that, Salesforce is constantly innovating, right? They're doing things with Flow and Tableau and Shield and all these things. And, as a native app, we get to take advantage of all of these embedded capabilities in the platform. So we don't have to go out and chase out, an analytic strategy when we can take advantage of one that's embedded within the platform. So then you inherit all the security, all the compliance, like Simon was saying, we don't have access to customer orgs. So that data is private to them. They don't have to worry about shipping their data outside of their own private Salesforce instance to process it or to do analytics or something like that on it. So, in terms of extensibility and things like that too, really you get to take advantage of that Salesforce platform, that Salesforce ecosystem as a major differentiator in terms of your ability to innovate and build on top of that quickly. And I would say that the last thing that I would really call out as a big benefit is just that, being native, you can be better together, right? You think about the shared concept of an identity of a user, you can have multiple apps be stitched together with, a common set of sharing and permissions, right? It's very quick to onboard users, to give them access to applications or prevent them from accessing applications, share data model and the like. So, the ability to modify your instance of Salesforce, bringing in multiple apps from the App Exchange or using apps that are embedded within the platform. It's really, truly amazing how quick, your organization can innovate and adopt and change rapidly with these capabilities. I'm sure all the other panelists have quite a few opinions on this. Anyone else have anything to comment on this one?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that sums it up really well. I think you do start with trust, and it does tend to become a core value for our company as well. Everyone on this call has been able to really kind of hone in on what is Salesforce and what is the business use case that we're looking to solve based off of the Salesforce users out there. And I think you get really a fast track to those, whether you're talking about personas, verticals, any gaps out there that exist in the industries. We're able to quickly get to what is the business case that we're looking for and who are the folks that we're looking to serve. And they are Salesforce users, and they tend to be very, very pointed at what a solution looks like. So I think, from a directional perspective, being a Salesforce native application really gives you that focus as well. And we've really, looked to hone in on that.
Yeah, that's a great point, JP.
That's our keyword too. It's focus. I mean, our messaging is the alignment with Salesforce and the focus. So we're speaking the same language when we're on a call with our subscribers. Another example we use is when you look at our company, you see one logo, and that's Fast Call. And honestly, for some of our competitors, they pride themselves on having 20 logos, but in our mind, 19 of those logos don't matter. If you're using Salesforce, that's a logo that matters. So that's, for us, the focus and that alignment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't really thought of that, but that is a very good benefit. A couple of things that we point out. So Flowsom is in the business of DevOps, native DevOps for Salesforce. We find that we get a lot better performance, just living in there in the Salesforce cloud, having to API in and have that extra level of indirection, or in some cases, multiple levels of indirection. The performance just isn't there. So we have immediate access to the data that's resident within that Salesforce cloud, which is a huge advantage. And then the other thing is a lot of things that are unique to our product are, we were able to implement because of the Salesforce programming environment. We're taking advantage of some features that are peerless, right, compared to some of the other platforms out there. And so we're able to do, conflict resolutions and rollbacks, and there's all kinds of unique things that we do that you literally couldn't do if you weren't built into Salesforce. So, we like to tell people that we take advantage of that programming environment. Salesforce is a low-code, no-code environment with, the express goal of accelerating application development and rollout. We can make it even faster, by taking advantage of some of those features that they've built uniquely into Salesforce. And so those are some of the things beyond security that, we like to point out to folks.
Yeah, and I think, again, from a customer's point of view, looking for native applications, what's the benefit for a customer is us as vendors that are creating these native apps can concentrate on the capability that is needed to address real business problems, rather than putting lots of resources into keeping the lights on. We don't have to look after servers or infrastructure or security we've been touching on. We can concentrate on the functionality that our customers are demanding and needing to solve real business problems.
100%.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and Simon, just to add on to that, it's not just about keeping the lights on, but it's even the features themselves. There's a lot of our competitors, and I'll be honest, they have a lot more functionality and features built into their resource forecasting and time tracking application. But in a lot of cases, they paint themselves in the corner. They say, this is the way you're going to do it, and this is the way you have to do it, because that's how we build it. Whereas we can focus on the primary core use cases. And given the flexibility of the platform, around automation and the fact that the objects are there and you can add your own fields and customization, we can help our customers build the functionality that they need that is very specific to their use case. And we can do it for one customer and we can do it for the next customer, and they each get exactly what they were looking for.
Absolutely.
I think finally, I'll probably kind of hone in on Salesforce is an innovative company, and we get to tie to that, right? That's M&A, that's the next 3 sprint releases, how we're going to look to adjust and pivot our plans accordingly. And we get to tie to, don't quote me on it, I think they're number 2 in Forbes as the most innovative company in the world. And we get to directly tie to that in addition to all the things we highlight in terms of performance and the platform and everything. And so, an acquisition of Slack, what does that do for Squiver? And how then can we, enable our customers? We're fast tracked to what otherwise could be years and years of planning and development for an off-platform play. So,
yeah, a perfect example of that, JP, is when Salesforce have been improving Einstein search recently, for example, that just naturally opens up a whole load of opportunity to how we can find data that's part of our application that's embedded into the customer's org. So, those sorts of innovations are critical. It means we haven't had to develop that, and the only people that are really benefiting or maximizing the benefit are the customers again.
Yeah, that's
a
what
really
we go
good
back
point.
to.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, JP.
I was just going to say the competitive advantages for the customer in that case, Simon. So they're the ones that are benefiting across the board based off of this fuller solution set, more performance solution set, and that is recognized through and throughout our ecosystem. So it's really encouraging.
I think for a business user thinking about a native app, it's important to understand that there's a real design decision that was made by all of these native apps, which is actually to the business user's benefit, because that means that even things like the configuration interface has to be in Salesforce. Because otherwise there's a security risk of configuring the app somewhere else. So you might have data in Salesforce, and then you configure it somewhere else, and then you've got the security risk of the APIs and the data transfer. So, but that means for a business user that everything is in Salesforce. The up-ramping of how to configure that app, how to make the adjustments is everything that your Salesforce admins and analysts are already working with. So it is a really big design decision from an app builder's perspective, but from a business user's perspective, it's a natural extension, both in terms of security, but also kind of building on what folks are already using for their work.
Megan, our tagline is we've never written a line of code outside of Salesforce.
Yeah, that's great to be able to say that's a powerful statement. It really is. I think, and I don't know what, your individual plans are for expanding your portfolio and things like that, but it seems like, we all would have an advantage, having gone down the native path, understanding how to do that. If you have additional applications or if you're going to enrich your portfolio, you already understand native. And so it seems like you can be a lot more flexible in the ability to provide, new feature functionality, new products as well, if you want to go down that path, right? So I think that's a huge advantage in terms of growth and being able to extend your capabilities.
Yeah, and I think, even though we're on a platform where we're rolling out our app, into customers' orgs, we certainly don't push customers or force customers to upgrade. And they can also skip releases as well, and skip significant releases, and not have to go back and apply every single patch or every single upgrade to get to the latest version when they want to. They can just install the app, they can sit on it if it's solving business problems that they need, and maybe later, we had a customer, it was 12, 18 months before they took a further upgrade of our application, and it was just seamless for them to do so. There was no risk in them doing that upgrade, and everything was backward compatible. So there's advantages all around for that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And, sort of on the topic of risk, that's a good segue over to another question that I'll pose to you, Rich, and that's, what are some of the other risks that you see that native apps help a customer avoid?
Well, I think implementation is one. A non-native app has questionable implementation. And I think that also goes to what Megan was just saying about design. Our application uses Lightning design systems, so which is common for a native application. So the application looks and feels like Salesforce. And honestly, one of the things that we'll say is that our application might not be the most beautiful. And we use Zoom as an example. Zoom is a beautifully designed app, but it doesn't look like Salesforce. So an application that is native, that's designed in Lightning design system, looks like Salesforce, and that drives implementation. And that same just can't be said for a non-native app, and that goes to cost, right? So having an application that's more difficult, or even has a question mark in terms of implementation, is going to be costly. Of course, we've talked about security and sharing data, compliance. You know, the idea that you're potentially opening up a back door, or you're losing control of your information. So we've talked about the security issues, but for us, it's training, it's onboarding. It's that for our application, the user should sit down and feel like they're in Salesforce. And if you have 5 applications in your stack, or 10, do you want 15 or do you want 20? The answer is you don't want, you most likely don't want one, right? You're not going to have one application in your stack, but you still will make the decision between 15 and 16. And a native application allows you to put more applications in that core stack and have that alignment, so that for that particular business function, you have an application that is seamless to set up, to install, and support.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really interesting point there, and when you're talking about having the comfort of a familiar interface, one of the things that I find, not just at Flowsom, but other companies I work for, is, we often underestimate adoption and change management, right? Some of the largest global system integrators that I've worked with, including Accenture, Deloitte, and others, they've got huge teams that do nothing but change management, right? Because you can take the greatest application in the world, the best enterprise application in the world, it's going to improve the way they do business and everything else. But, if you have a small group that just refuses to go along, or says, I don't want to change the way I do business, or this is, introducing some sort of life change that I don't want to take on, you can bring a project to its knees, right? If people aren't going with the flow. So what I find is that the familiar interface is one step towards, oh my gosh, this isn't anything that much different than what I've been doing, And again, I mean, as hardcore technologists, sometimes we just underestimate that, but there's people out there that aren't change agents necessarily, and they want to be doing the same job that they've been doing, or as close to it as possible.
Yeah, we find particularly with a new Salesforce rollout, or even just a new hire, they may love Salesforce, but a non-native third-party app is now installed or integrated, or not integrated, or not installed, and you're asking the end user to use it, and the end user hates that third-party app. They're going to reject Salesforce. So one of the messages that we really try to make is that your entire Salesforce project could crash because you made a poor choice in a partner application. And you just don't want that to happen. You don't want the end user to reject Salesforce because they don't like using an application, when there are native alternatives that will just cross that risk off your list.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Improved Apps, we're in business. We help customers with a native app that helps end users engage and follow the right process with embedded help and training. So that working across any application that's installed from the App Exchange, any native app, gives a nice, what we call user engagement layer, a common way that people can access help and training to understand what they should be doing across those processes. And more importantly, to what you're talking about there, is what happens when change is pushed out, and change is coming faster and faster. You need better ways to engage your users, and that's what our native app does. And that's really important, that you're thinking about that innovation. Innovation typically means change on end users. So thinking about a native way to engage and support the users is key as far as we're concerned.
And just to add to that too, a lot of times when we're talking about, the difference between a native app and a non-native application, and the risks that are posed by a non-native application, your data's, outside of Salesforce. There's this integration that you have to manage. There's custom configuration windows that are different between, a native app in Salesforce versus that application. that just multiplies in complexity when we're talking about not just one application, but the whole suite of applications that a company might need to run their business.
Yeah.
So when you multiply that by 10 or 15 apps, you can see how, having those as native versus 15 separate different ways to configure, 15 separate different ways of storing your data, you can see the benefit of having that all native on the platform.
I think we have kind of a funny story that one of our customers didn't realize they have thousands of users using our app, and most of the people don't actually know it's a Kunu because they have their own name for it. They call it the pacing tool. And so they have just like a tab in their Salesforce instance, and they go there and they use their pacing tool. And I kind of told one of our developers, I'm like, maybe we should put our logo on here or something, so they actually know what they're using. But I think the point is for the end users, that blurry line between what is Salesforce and what is the app is actually, it may not be great from a product marketing perspective for a Kunu, but it's fantastic in terms of the user adoption and change management and being able to kind of keep up with just yet another app functionality.
The analogy we always use is, a single piece of fabric or a single pane of glass. You end up having that consistent look and feel. And I think, from the front end, from the user experience, having that consistency is key. You don't have that jarring experience as you move from one application or aspect of an application to the next. But I think that extends to the back end of the application too. You think about, reporting, right? To be able to run a report on shared data, perhaps on the account or contact object where, fields have been surfaced from various applications. It's super powerful. And although that line does get blurry, really it's empowering for businesses. So.
Ryan, to tack on there, we often start with Salesforce as the system of record. And I know a lot of companies do, and they struggle with that. And they look at this in terms of, are my users using? How can I improve that experience? What does my data look like? And ultimately, it's up to both Salesforce and us to help with that process so that output, the reporting, the Einstein output, all looks and feels in the most valuable framework possible. And so I don't think I've heard that Salesforce is the system of record pretty much in every one of my calls, and then it's followed by, and here are the list of things we can improve upon. And I think that's the real opportunity for us and our customer base.
And I think it's important to point out, I think, when we talk to Salesforce folks, actually people within Salesforce, that is, I try to let them know that, I think there's a dramatic improvement that can be made by native ISV vendors to the Salesforce platform. I think we're adding a lot of value to their platform as opposed to, I would say a bolt-on application, right? I distinguish fair or not. I mean, I distinguish between sort of built-in applications, which is native, or bolt-on applications, people that are coming from outside of Salesforce and attempting to attach to that platform in another way. I think that as native application ISVs, we are adding a higher degree of value to the Salesforce platform too, and that aspect should appeal to them.
I think that's right. I know for one of our customers, we improved their Lightning adoption, like some significant percentage in terms of like actual stickiness and adoption of the platform. So I think that's true in our experience.
Right. So you have this sort of virtuous circle, with the native ISVs and partners. And so for us, go ahead.
I was going to say one example to that point you just made that we use for that bolt-on application. You can often see it in the timeline. The application developer, the team, also a comment that Megan made, that the development team got together and came up with an idea. Hey, we're going to build an application, and that goes along. And then one day, a salesperson comes in the office and says, "Hey, we had a great meeting today. They want the application to work in Salesforce." And I say, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that." Right? But it's a completely different start. It's a different philosophy. It's a different alignment. Again, for a native developer from day one, they were thinking about Salesforce. So it's a different way that those applications, and we're honest and open. We say sometimes, Tom, to use your word, the bolt-on is good. It's a good integration. They did a good job bolting it on, but sometimes they didn't, right? Because it just wasn't their primary focus, and never was their primary focus. And honestly, it probably is never going to be, because if an application works outside of Salesforce, by definition, their primary focus is outside of Salesforce. And for us, it's that difference. It's bolt-on's a great word, right? Because it was bolted at some point after the birth of the company. There was a bolting that happened, and it's focus.
And Tom, I'm a little longer in the tooth myself, and I remember the Salesforce platform being, one of these things that you might have only worked in a sales capacity framework on, right? And you're only utilizing one use case. And so call Salesforce what it is today. I am seeing everything from every industry out there to HR to accounting. We've got accounting seat on here. And so, that is a true testament of the word platform, and Salesforce being that platform can only really address so much. There are gaps that us as app exchange providers are going to help our customers fill, and we fill it in a very valuable way. And so I think that that's certainly something that I'm encouraged by as we've all chosen this platform of choice, which is Salesforce.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I go pretty far back with Salesforce as well. And I remind people all the time that, it's a whole different world out there. I mean, it went beyond selling CRM licenses to, being the dominant platform for a number of different applications, enterprise applications. As you said, we see the criticality of applications that we're dealing with. Since we're in DevOps, we see every kind of application that people are developing around Salesforce. And the breadth is just amazing. It really is, as you said. One sort of good example, based on current events, for instance, last year in government, one of the fastest applications that was propelling Salesforce was the contact tracing. It turned out to be the perfect platform for it. I mean, state municipalities, federal hospitals were able to develop that application so much faster and proliferate it, and I've seen it around the world. People have developed so many of these, but it just turned out to be a perfect accelerated platform for that application. They got it out the door. But again, when you build an application like that, there's hidden risks because, you've got privacy data, there's a lot of compliance, protection, privacy, and things like that. And so it's not just about pushing the application out as fast as you possibly can. You have to do it in a secure manner. And that's where we get back to the native and saying, okay, how are you going to be sure that this isn't going to leak out? Because those, you can imagine those contact tracing applications are carrying a lot of confidential information and things like that. So it turns out that, Salesforce is a good platform for it. And then as a DevOps solution contributing to that, we can tell people, there's no way that we're going to have access to your DevOps data. It's going to be inside of Salesforce. You will have access to it. We even put that in our contract. We said, you understand that we do not have access. Once we get it implemented, we will not have access to your information at all. So that extra measure of protection was there. And by the way, that also plays into a really hot security topic we didn't talk about yet, and that's zero trust, right? So, because we're able to give people the assurance that technically we have no means of touching your data. I mean, it's the perfect example of a zero trust environment where the opposite would be, oh, we're going to give you, we have the privilege to touch your data, but we promise we won't, right? That's not what zero trust is. So we like to hang our hat on that and move even more towards that direction, because that's very fashionable right now, both in government and in private industry on the security side. So that was just one of the examples that we saw over the last year or so. And by the way, it's continuing. They're still developing more contract tracing applications. So it's continuing to happen.
That's one of my favorite conversations to have with customers and prospects from an accounting application perspective. I can't see your financial data. I don't want to see your financial data. That's yours. It's private to you, and we have no business looking at it. That's yours. So,
yeah, it's a great point. And our competition, we know for a fact from their websites, they'll say, they'll do the opposite. They'll say, you understand that we have access to your data. They actually have to reveal that to the customer. So we flip it over and say, you understand that this data is in the Salesforce environment, but it is not accessible by us.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful statement, and we make a big deal about it, right?
It's important.
So, let's see, we've got time for a few more issues here. But I think we touched on this a little bit, Simon, but, can you talk a little more about integration, ease of integration, and, as one of the advantages to native applications?
Yeah, we have touched on quite a few of the key points. I think just to really highlight, there's standard approaches to it. So if you're already integrating or have integrated, then a native app applies the same approaches to how you might do that. The native APIs that are available, they are just an extension when you plug a native app into your Salesforce environment. I think we also touched on extensibility, how easy it is with a native app to extend the capability. So if that's important for your integration needs as well, because you might need some of the native apps data to be taken out of your org into another trusted environment, and therefore using the APIs or creating new fields that capture different data around that native app just naturally makes things very easy. I think we also touched on earlier about utilizing the data in native apps, integrating them to your reports and dashboards, I think is a big thing for our customers. They haven't got to learn new reporting environment and how to add new data to their existing reports or how to move that data around. It's just what they already know. And I think the final thing really on how easily is it integrated really is just thinking about the installation from the App Exchange. Go and search the App Exchange. You can find one of the apps very easily. You can test drive. You can install it into any org that you want to very, very quickly in a matter of minutes. You can set it up following the application's guidance, and they're just easier to maintain. Any integration you have, there's less technical debt I like to talk about quite regularly. There's less things that could go wrong with a native application when you're thinking about how it's going to integrate to your Salesforce environment or against other applications, really. So, the bottom line for customers is finding an application that serves some needs, that's going to solve some problems they have within the business, testing and trialing it out, and getting a quicker ROI once it goes into production are really the killer things for us and our customers.
I got to put on my old consultant hat here, because seriously, native apps, you don't have to deal with any integrations. And as a consultant, I'll tell you, there's a great third-party app, but we use one of these integration bots, and it was you look up a match, that's a cost. You look up this, is a cost. So and then we switched to integration approach. It cost that company thousands and thousands of dollars. We finally even had to refund some of it because we're this is too much, right? So I just do not underestimate just the huge benefit of being able to not deal with an integration and maintain it and fix it when it breaks and troubleshoot an extension. So the fact that you don't have to integrate anything. And we've had other people, people are just boom, put it in production and it starts working, obviously test it in a sandbox, but all of our apps, you actually, wouldn't necessarily need to do that, although that's best practice to test in a sandbox. But that's the point of a native, is that you can it'll function right away. You don't have to pay the cost of integrating or troubleshooting or being beholden to the way that this particular developer decided that the data needs to connect back and forth.
I think that's the key, really, isn't it? It's easier just to get it close to your environment, test it, and just see how it's going to operate. Is it going to solve the challenges that you're hoping it will solve? And you can do that far quicker because, like you say, there's inherently less or no integration at all.
I have a quick question for the group. One of the first things that we're usually asked is, do you integrate with Salesforce? And our answer is no. We don't integrate with Salesforce because we are in Salesforce. And I'll often say, I don't like the word integrate, because integrate isn't in. Integrate is really outegrate, because the correct word is outegrate, because you're taking something from the outside and you're putting it in, right? Mm-hmm. So I struggle with, how do we reply to that question? So how do you all reply to that question? Do you integrate with Salesforce?
I think that's a great point. I think that's a really good point. I use the analogy of I don't need to find a key to the house because I live in the house, right? I live in their house, yeah. Right? So I use the house analogy, but I totally agree with that.
Richard, I want to know how to spell outer great. Say it.
Great.
Put that in the text. How do we spell outer? I don't need to integrate because I'm outer great. Say that again.
Outer great.
Yeah, we simply, if we get asked that question, we simply say there is no integration.
Yep. No, I think that's a great point. I mean,
I love turning that question
take that word out.
Yep. That's my favorite question to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
And Megan, you were talking about the view from a consultant standpoint, and we hear this all the time, over the last year or two, we've really had a lot of, like I said, some of the global system integrators come around to, our application, whereas they might have been building it on their own before. And I think that for consultants, whether they're big or small, risk and predictability are two really, really important things. So it's sort of like, how do I know that this is it's going to work on a dependable fashion, or I can predict exactly how it's going to work together. If I know that I'm tying together two native applications, I've de-risked that situation to a high degree. And there's a lot of benefit in that, because the hidden costs will kill you. Once you realize, you've got to build all these other structures, and, it just becomes this sort of, Frankenstein, amalgamation or whatever. So I think, de-risking is really important for customers and, for the consultants that serve their customers working with, our native applications. So.
Hey, Tom, can I just throw one other quick point out about that? I think as much as we can evangelize, how great it is to have every one of your applications be a native application, the reality is that companies are going to have external apps. They're going to have proprietary apps. They're going to have something that's external to Salesforce. And when it comes to integrating your application, a native Salesforce application, to those external apps, just the fact that we are native on the platform simplifies even that integration, just for the fact that we could take advantage of data API, REST APIs, everything that comes native with the platform. So taking data from an external time tracking application and trying to push it into QuickBooks, for example, they have to explicitly build an integration that works with QuickBooks. Whereas when it comes to Resource Hero being native on the Salesforce platform, we can build that integration to QuickBooks, and it can be very custom to their use case and exactly what they want, because we can leverage all those native APIs. So I think it's important to note that it's not just the integration between native Salesforce apps, but it's even our native app and those external apps that they might have to, because for whatever reason, it's a proprietary app or they have to do it. It makes that much easier.
Yeah, and we're using Salesforce API. So when a subscriber wants to take data outside of Salesforce, they're not using our APIs and our applications APIs. They're using Salesforce APIs, and if they have the skills and the resources, and of course those APIs are mature, they're well documented, and they're familiar, and we think that's also very important. So that whenever we're asked, well, can you do this or do you integrate with that? It's through the Salesforce API, which again it's great to be able to have an answer as a native developer that points back to Salesforce.
Yeah, great points. I think we're going to, if you don't mind, with the time we have left, I'm going to go over, there's a handful of questions that have been asked by the attendees. So I'll go ahead and take those one by one. The first one is, let's see, I'll just read it. It says, I have a native app and have a longer term question. Is there enough reward or intrinsic value to integrate advanced data processing like machine learning off platform at the risk of being non-native? Is the IP more valuable off platform versus native? Simon and JP, both talked about, using the internal applications within Salesforce like Tableau and Einstein, et cetera. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Well, I've got a couple thoughts on this, and we've talked a lot about the benefits of being native, right? I think that gives us a lot of capabilities. We've outlined that extensively here. That's not to say that other platforms can't be secure. It doesn't mean that you can't trust other platforms as well. You may have internal tooling, internal infrastructure, or you may have a trusted platform that you can use to process data. So, as I look at this, there's a lot of benefits, right? Cost savings, risk management, compliance, et cetera, for being native. But in terms of, alternatives, I think you have to look at it as a capability-led conversation, right? If you have a tool like Tableau and its capabilities support your use cases, your requirements, there's obviously a tremendous amount of benefit for using a native tool like that. At some point, if if the tools that are available to you don't support your requirements and you have another trusted platform, you're willing to go through the integrations, things like that, there's nothing that should be prohibitive of that. It's just that, you have to look at those benefits and weigh them against each other.
Yeah, I think I would add that you want to make sure that this is additive to your application. Don't do AI just for the sake of doing AI. I see that a little too much nowadays. But if you're going to pursue that, I would probably approach it in a way that you're able to, address a lot of what came up on this call. You're going to have additional security requirements that you're going to need to walk through. You actually might need to start maybe even addressing some kind of like broader mechanisms there. I always recommend GTM guides is a great resource for you here. If you're looking for some direction around, this is where I live and this is where I'd like my application to go. Does this make sense in context of Salesforce and or other? Salesforce Ben is another great resource, but fully vet this and make sure that this is part of your roadmap and not just an add-on that, it's a Me Too mechanism. Otherwise, Salesforce has a lot of capabilities in terms of analytics, output, that you should take advantage of as well.
Yeah, for us, it's a USP to say we're 100% native. That's the bottom line for us. So we question anything why we can't do it on the platform, then perhaps we shouldn't be doing it on the platform. We shouldn't be doing it.
I think it's also important to look at the history of Salesforce too. I mean, there's been some limitations to the platform that they've seen. So maybe it's the analytics, so they make that strategic acquisition of Tableau. They see a limitation on the amount of data that can be processed in real time, through Apex, so they start introducing things like functions. There's definitely a commitment there on the Salesforce side that, they're seeing where the future is and they're trying to enhance the platform, Heroku, and these other kind of tools that they're bringing into the Salesforce sphere so that you could leverage. So as an application provider, if I was starting from scratch, I think that's pretty positive that you can see that through history, they're looking to see what the future is, and they're making those acquisitions that their application providers can then leverage without having to go and reinvent the wheel or build it themselves off platform. So I think that's always important to look at as a new app.
And even built on platform, right? It's somewhat of a different angle on the same question. Is one of the things that we'll say internally is we like to shop in the Salesforce store, and that means we always look to Salesforce First as, well, what can Salesforce do here, and can we accomplish this using something from Salesforce? And the answer isn't always yes, but we always look to Salesforce. Can we do this in Salesforce? And we take that question completely to the end, and then ultimately, if we decide no, we'll write it ourselves. But I think, so that's not just, is it on Salesforce or off of Salesforce, but I think a native developer also will always look to Salesforce first. And that's important to our subscribers because they know we're using Salesforce tools and technologies.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great answers. And, luckily there's some pretty good forums out there for vetting applications, between G2, and the App Exchange itself. So, and you can also get the opinions of people in Salesforce, Salesforce employees, and say, try to get as much information as you can as to the performance and adaptability and all the other stuff of this application. If it isn't native, then, at least try to find out how well it does work with Salesforce, right? Because we all know that, integrations, I said the I word again, and API calls and things like that. I mean, integrations come in different sizes, right? You've got bi-directional, unidirectional, I always use the analogy. It's like, did you build a bridge or is it a ferry that goes across once a week, that kind of thing. So, how tight is that integration? I would encourage people to go out there and look at some of those resources that we talked about, and get as much information as you possibly can, and then see where it's not just, oh yeah, we built a quick integration to Salesforce, but, from a partnership perspective, how are you tied to Salesforce? Is your future product direction somewhat tied to them? Are you going to improve along with them and things like that, as opposed to we just did a quick and dirty integration and, it should be okay for now. So I think integrations, like I said, there's a whole lot of different ways to integrate. There's another question that says, can you talk about licensing as it relates to native applications? And, you know, obviously we may have different licensing models here on the call, but, you know, if somebody wants to take that on.
Yeah, I'll talk about this. Oh, go ahead, Richard. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about, I mean, I think one thing to note is that like all this time and energy that in other companies that we've run doing licensing, Salesforce handles, so we can redirect that into the product piece. From a business user perspective, like you get what you already know. So for example, like permission sets are common, like we use, and I'm sure many other native apps do, to like extend permissions. And in terms of the pricing, Salesforce is continuing to evolve how one can charge, whether it's by user, by org. For example, Akunu, we charge by opportunity owner, but everybody has access to the data. So there's some creative ways to charge, but from a business user perspective, like the controlling who has access to it is, of course, everything that you would expect based on a native application in terms of extending via profiles and permission sets. Richard, did you have more to add?
Well, that was a great answer and a great question. We are a user application. So again, it's the number one benefit for us is that user licensing is managed in Salesforce. We're also somewhat unusual in that we're using Salesforce for our payments as well. But we just love giving all the answers. It's managed by Salesforce, right? For us, it's a great answer to give. So for us, licensing is benefit number one. There's no user data leaving Salesforce. There are no user settings leaving Salesforce. It is, you know, we are leveraging your Salesforce user records so that you can manage all that easily. And that's the best answer that we like to give.
Yeah, and I think it's also from a licensing point of view, you know, if customers want to trial a native app, it's quite easy to, as I said earlier, install it. But, you know, control, you know, if you don't want to buy a number of licenses, I'm sure most vendors, native app vendors out there will support, you know, a controlled release, as I call it, departmental, test it, prove it before you expand, and be safe and know that the licensed users are going to see the functionality and everybody else carries on as normal, and then you can expand on it when you realize the value you're getting from the app.
Great. And just speaking for Flowsom real quickly, we actually we're an OEM partner of Salesforce, so we actually provide an org to go along with our product, because we don't recommend that people put it directly into their production org. So that gives us sort of the OEM category. But we're a subscription model, and we try to keep it as close to the Salesforce model as we possibly can, so that people don't get confused, as they often can with SaaS and cloud applications. So we try to keep it as close as we can. And also the trial, somebody mentioned the ease of setting up trials and things like that. That's another big benefit for us. We routinely do limited trials to kind of demonstrate the salient features of our product, and being a Salesforce native app, it gives us a big advantage there.
And typically around this category, consumption-based, user-based, OEM, Salesforce is going to be able to pivot with your business model there. So I don't know if that's a business owner question or if it's more of a can I buy type of question, but there are ways to achieve either direction there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we are at the top of the hour, 12 noon, at least in my time zone. So I'd like to thank all of the folks that joined us today to hear about native applications, and I'd like to extend a big thanks to all of our panelists as well. So I hope everybody got some good stuff out of this presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you all later.
Thanks all.
Thanks.